You're listening to Inclusive AF with Jackye Clayton and Katee Van Horn.
This is where I do my intro. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inclusive AF podcast. My name is Jackye Clayton.
And this is Katee Van Horn.
See, we just try to mix it up. So in which case, of course, I did not do I'm like, what? Intro? I don't even know how to do that.
But it works. It works. You did a very fine job.
Thank
We're going to
you.
give you a 10 out of 10, Jackye. 10 out of 10.
I appreciate that. 5 out of 5 stars would highly recommend. Well, I'm glad everyone is here. We have a very special guest, and we're really excited to talk to them. And I know that we're going to have a great time today. I would like to introduce you to Dr. Kimberly Young. Is it McLear? McLear, and I'll allow you to introduce yourself a little bit. Tell the people about you.
Awesome. Well, I just thank you both for having me on your podcast. I really just love the energy that you all bring and just the awareness of inclusion. So a little bit about me. I'm active duty officer in the U.S. Coast Guard. Coast Guard is one of the smallest branches of the U.S. military, the armed forces. And I wear many hats. So some of the hats that I wear, I'm also a tenured professor at the Coast Guard Academy. And I'm also on loan doing cybersecurity for my day job at a federal agency where we focus on, my portfolio at least focuses on cybersecurity training and education. I'm also super passionate about just doing the work, community organizing, and just throughout my experiences, we have to have the courage to speak up, do the right thing. Our time is now, and I think about our ancestors, and want to make sure that we're doing right by them and all the people who came before us. So I kind of have my hands a little bit, here and there and everywhere, but I'm really just passionate about humanity and passionate about bringing folks together so we can co-create a future for everyone to thrive in.
I love you saying that. Me and Katee used to say we were so busy until today, actually, after looking at your background.
Yeah, 10 minutes ago, I felt like I had a lot going on, but now I feel like I have been sitting here quietly. So
kind of like a loser, kind of like I need to get more busy. The stuff you're talking about, people who aren't watching on YouTube, we are like shaking our head because we're like, whoa, you could have stopped with active duty Coast Guard. That would have been enough for us.
Yeah, especially during hurricane season. Yes.
Yeah. About that. What is that? I would love to know what made you, because obviously you have lots of interests and lots of passions. How did you get started? What made you decide to join the Coast Guard? Let's just start with that.
Yeah, no, I actually was talking to someone just earlier today on that exact question. And there's some days, to be honest, I don't know. I'm first generation U.S. Both my parents immigrated from Trinidad and Tobago. They came to the U.S. when they were teenagers. And they both actually enlisted in the Air Force. So I'm the youngest of four. And growing up and just kind of watching them kind of do the military, I thought, I don't want to do that. I want to go to art college, and I had different types of interests. And I was in high school, and I think the conversation went like this. She said, are you thinking about or interested in going to college? And I said, yeah, I think so. And she said, well, how are you going to pay for it?
Yes. Yeah.
So that was the talk. And so I knew at that moment, my parents weren't going to be funding my education. So for me, I just looked at, different scholarships, different options. And as a kid, I didn't really love the concept of moving around. And I saw, even as a child, and my parents had, West Indian accents, and I would see forms of exclusion, right? And I would see, various forms of code switching and things like that. So, but I thought, well, let me give it a shot, right? I enjoy public service. I enjoy serving others. So I thought, what's the worst that could happen? As I laugh. So it really just started off as, I tried out for a few years. It allowed me to pay for my education at FAMU. And then I thought, hey, it's a stepping stone, and kind of figure it out from there. So, but it wasn't a childhood dream. I would say my dream was really just serving others and just being a good person. And it was just me just trying to explore and figure that out. I didn't know anyone who was in the Coast Guard, and I ended up getting a scholarship, and just, 19 and a half years later, I'm still in.
Wow, 19 and a half years.
That's amazing. So what has been the biggest, I don't even know, like storm or like rescue, or what has been your most amazing experience in the Coast Guard?
I
can answer that rhetorically.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's just the three of us. No one else is
asking
listening.
For a friend.
Confidential. It's totally fine. You can totally. We have
it's just the three of us.
Clearance.
Yeah, that's right.
Totally cool.
Well, I've been deployed. I have supported large scale hurricane operations actually via social media. That was a project that we did with Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma. And actually, when I was at the Coast Guard Academy, I had several students. We had up to about 100 students at one time, but we were working with a nonprofit and passively monitoring social media and then pushing that back to big Coast Guard operations so they can decide, how to divert assets to do rescue. Before that, I was also deployed for a Deepwater Horizon. So it was a massive oil spill out in the Gulf. And so I had a chance to really, get my hands dirty on that and support. But, first reaction I thought of when you said the biggest storm was, to be honest, is really more about people and culture. I'm a federal whistleblower. I testified on Capitol Hill. So it's been, the last 8 years have really been me feeling like I'm at kind of the center of a big hurricane, center of a big storm. And so I really would say doing a lot of the people and culture work, not necessarily as purely a practitioner, but someone who has been harmed through harassment and discrimination, retaliation. I would say that's probably the biggest storm that I've experienced because it's been an 8-year storm. And it really pales in comparison to the operational work that I've done throughout my career. So that was my first instinct is, it's really the navigating people and culture and the amount of strength and courage it takes to be able to do that type of work.
I'm glad you said that because I was just looking at a hearing that happened recently, and it was a Black woman from Louisiana talking to the gentleman from Louisiana, and I was so triggered as this white man was talking to this Black woman from Louisiana as she's trying to tell a story. He was interrupting her, and then I think he called her boo and I was ready to strangle. It's already a big deal. You're already nervous. You already know you're at a disadvantage power-wise from sitting. It takes everything. And when you testify, as a whistleblower, so this wasn't oh, we should plant more trees. This is a major, how can you tell us about that? Tell us what you could tell us about that, because on top of that's why it's wait, you're in the Coast Guard, that's why that's enough. But then there's all these other pieces.
Yeah, no, it's and planting trees are important.
Very important. And no offense to any trees. Love the trees.
I would say to an outsider looking in, I'm a highly decorated military officer, and I just love thinking. I love doing. I love just building teams where people can just thrive as their authentic selves and innovate. And I actually think it's those exact same traits and qualities is what made me a target of workplace bullying. Young Black queer woman with a PhD who just came from supporting a cabinet deputy secretary and a cabinet secretary of Homeland Security. It's a very rare type of an opportunity. And so when I went to the Coast Guard Academy to teach, in the military, we wear our resume on our uniform. You have your medals and your ribbons. And so you're pretty much a walking resume. And so I actually think that was a huge reason of why I was targeted, in addition to being Black and queer and a woman, but also just being, an intelligent person on top of that, who has served in these high profile positions. So unfortunately, I endured a lot of harassment, a lot of bullying, and that's not uncommon in an academic, a non-military academic setting. So if you really kind of overlay workplace bullying that occurs in academia overlaid with military institutionalized harm, overlaid with all of my identities. And it was really, unfortunately, I hate to use a cliche, but it was a perfect storm of harm. And I couldn't have been an outsider in, in any more, types of ways. So I spoke up, and because I think of my caring nature, it's a college campus. So unfortunately, we also had sexual assault. We had things going on in the student population. So I was one of very few faculty members that students trusted with that type of sensitive information. And, I was raised, if something is not right, you do something about it. And so that's what I did. And so that target on my back grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. And so I kept speaking up, and, I was retaliated against in more ways than one. And at my lowest point, I had suicide ideation. And I pretty much was at a crossroads. I could either resign my commission, give up my pension, give up everything I've done in my career, right, and start over from scratch, or I could stay and re-strategize, regroup, change my mindset, and fight. And that's exactly what I did. And so I started working with folks on the Hill in Congress. I started contacting the Inspector General's office, which in real time people didn't know I was doing it because I was kind of sworn to secrecy on their investigation as to not compromise it. And my case was actually the last whistleblower and civil rights case of the late Chairman Elijah Cummings. And the investigation to the Coast Guard was also led by him and also Chairman Bennie Thompson of Mississippi. So it was just a really incredible experience. These are two civil rights icons and legends in the United States, and to be able to work with them very closely, very directly, and the committees that they represent, all those offices, both on the House and in the Senate. So after they completed their investigation in 2019, they asked me to testify. And for me, it was no brainer. All I can think about, again, was my ancestors. I think about all the people who have come before us in the ranks, not in the ranks. And it was just the right thing to do. So it was a very surreal out-of-body experience. I remember one political party was on the right, the other political party was on the left, and all their staffers, standing room only. People had flown from across the country, as far as California, to attend. And I remember one congressman had actually told me, hey, Kim, this is a Coast Guard topic, so it may not be as popular. And in terms of the national timeline significance, it was also the same time that the current President of the United States at that time was actually being impeached the first time. So a lot of those same congressional resources were actually dealing with the impeachment of the President of the United States. And so there actually was a probability that my hearing would never even happen because the resources were actually split. So it really was an improbable scenario, number one, to be able to survive harassment for that many years. It was an improbable scenario to be able to not just file various complaints, but actually have them come back substantiated, not by one, but by two outside independent entities. It was highly unlikely to also then have a congressional investigation, let alone a hearing that actually was scheduled. And so it was literally just improbable. And so for me, I really just took a deep breath and spoke my truth. I really did need to prepare. I had notes, but I need to reference it, right? When you know what the truth is, you just speak it. And unfortunately, my service chief at the time, so he's the number one admiral in charge of the Coast Guard, I guess he had better things to do that day. And I don't know what he was doing, washing his hair. I don't know what he was doing, but he didn't show up. He didn't show up. I like my hair too, but I'm just saying. So he didn't show up. So Congress actually empty chaired him. They had they had a table, they had a name tent, and an empty chair, and they proceeded with the hearing without him. And so for me, I think about these moments in time, where we're called upon to do something, which I actually think is pretty basic. Telling the truth is actually pretty basic, right? And I think especially for public servants, those of us who have an oath to do so, what happens when our integrity is lost, right? What impact does that have on the people who we serve? So that's really why I chose to stay in the Coast Guard, to be able to speak truth. And as Chairwoman Maloney asked me at the very onset of the hearing, she asked me, where did I find the strength to fight the Coast Guard? And it was the opening question. I was, nervous. It was out of body experience. And I very politely, reframed her question in my answer. And I said, I'm not fighting the Coast Guard. I'm fighting for a better Coast Guard. It shouldn't be me up there speaking, right? But how could I not speak if I'm seeing all of these injustices? So to answer your question, it was just an out-of-body experience. Unfortunately, Elijah Cummings had passed away at that point, so he did not see it come to fruition. So I did testify in his honor. And like I said, I just try my best to continue to do my small part. Life is short, life is precious. And I don't honestly think what I did was that fundamentally courageous. I think to be inclusive, right? What does it mean? It means we have to have courage. We have to actually have the courage to create spaces where everyone can be themselves and thrive.
But like, you're literally my hero. I mean, if you look at the intersectionality and of just the day-to-day, and I'm glad that you said, some things that you touched on was like looking backwards to your ancestors and building a better Coast Guard and not having the support. There's so many things, as you know, there's so many facets to your story. A lot of people just like, as in the former administration and our former president, a lot of us were just afraid to go to the store, like afraid to walk outside or afraid of the backlash of putting a sign in your yard that says, Black Lives Matter. And you're testifying already knowing, because it was like open field day on Black and brown people and queer people. And it was like, you can just treat people in any way that you want. And you said like, of course that's what I would do. But and your parents were immigrant. Like, there's just so many layers. And I think there's definitely something to be said by that, but then that's why it's so important that your story be told and that we can lift you up to have that. But I also think that it's important because there are days when we do get tired, like especially doing this work. There are days where I'm like, I don't even know why I work with people at all. Like, if I had a choice, I'm going to work at a salt mine and I'm going to have a headset and I'm gonna knock the salt down and I'm gonna go home. Like, I just can't take it. And working with people, where do you think,
Jackye, you would last about a day in the salt mine?
Well, to be clear, I said that yesterday
too. Here to talk to. There's no one else to talk to.
That's right. I told somebody, I was like, if I say, so it's not very funny, but I always say, I'm going to set you on fire. And my husband said, you probably shouldn't say that. And I said, people who really know me know I'm not going to chase anybody. They're going to run. It's not going to happen. Like, I just say the things. So no, I probably wouldn't work out at a salt mine. However, like, where there had to be strength there is strength in that moment. Like, where did you get your support? Like, it wasn't the people that you worked for directly. And we know that the things that you were facing, where did you find that strength?
Yeah, it's at a very deep level. I grew up around military bases. I'm the youngest of four, so I think I just observed a lot. And I remember seeing Black veterans who served in Vietnam, and you can just literally see the differences and the inequities of how people are mistreated, and just how culturally sometimes we just discard people for no reason. And so as a child, I was always studying, I was always observing, I was always asking and empathetic to those types of situations. And so for me, I just didn't really put a whole lot of thought into what could the consequences be. It didn't matter because I always say I'm lucky. And that's how I still feel. I work with a lot of families of survivors and non-survivors, families that lost loved ones to suicide due to psychological violence endured in the workplace. So I always say I'm lucky. I had ideation in 2016, and if the variables were, a little bit differently, I wouldn't be here. So I always say, with every breath I have in my lungs, I'm going to use it to advocate, to speak. So I don't worry about the consequences. I don't worry about the risk. I have, strong family support. I have, friends and allies. The support from the local communities have always been strong. Journalists have always been, part of my support system as well, and helping to shine a light on these injustices. And, also folks on the Hill and congressional staffers. And so I've really have found village. I found community in people who share this common belief that we're all deserving of dignity. Right. We're all deserving of dignity, and we shouldn't have to fight for dignity. Right. But yet we do. So, I didn't do it by myself, but I think I carry just really a feeling of, I don't worry. And I think that's really probably the biggest blessing about all of this is I stopped worrying a long time ago. I really did. I stopped worrying a long time ago, and I think my ancestors would want me to not only fight, but also find joy, pursue justice, but also pursue joy. And so even, as I have been fighting or advocating over these last 8 years specifically, I've always spoken my whole career, but I have my own flair to it. I have my own flair to it, and so more to come, on that. Activism is an art form for me. And so I'm sure, my employer is always looking for ways to, we got her now, as I laugh. But when you're on the right side, right, when you're on the right side of history, I'm a whistleblower. I'm not the one who is harming other people. I'm trying to draw attention to people who are unethical, who are abusing their power, and through that abuse of power, they're causing harm. So I find my strength from within at a very deeply personal level, and that strength says, don't worry. You have to trust that you're being held by this village.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for the work that you continue to do. Thank you for standing up for what is right and for sharing your story. I want to ask, in that space and the 19 years you've been in the Coast Guard, what are the positive changes that you've seen? And obviously we know there's still work to be done. What are some of the things that you see, and maybe not specifically the Coast Guard, but just overall, that still need to be fixed and still need work?
Yeah, thank you for that question. What also kind of keeps my engines going as well is seeing such a wide diversity of people who are passionate about inclusion after that light bulb goes off. So being an educator, being a Black educator, a lot of people will assume, oh, well, you're going to have Black students, they'll kind of gravitate towards you. But I really think what surprised a lot of people, it didn't surprise me, but the diversity of faculty and students who, once they saw what was going on, they made a conscious decision to say, they don't want to be a part of that. That's not alignment with their values. It's incongruent with their value system. And one of our valedictorians actually made a very impassioned speech. He happens to be a white male engineer, and the Service Academy graduations are actually nationally televised. Sometimes the President of the United States is, as a speaker. So he chose to actually talk about, and he spoke to his peers, and he basically said, it's up to us, right, as new graduates, to figure out how we're actually going to end sexual assault in the military, how we're going to end harassment and discrimination. And so me knowing that his journey from age, 18 plus 4 years, and now here he is on the national stage. He could have spoken about anything, but he chose to talk about inclusion, safety, authenticity, integrity. So I think about those examples and I carry those with me because that also gives me hope. This is not, a one demographic situation. This is something that impacts everybody. And I think when the truth strikes a chord, it resonates across all of these different types of groups and populations. So that's really what I have seen, is a lot of people demonstrating more courage, asking different types of questions, being bolder, and also smiling through it, right? Because they're fundamentally rejecting this notion that we have to accept exclusion and psychological violence as status quo.
Right. I want to touch on that because you've made the distinction. We talk a lot we hear the phrase psychological safety, but you're using the phrase like psychological violence. And I would like to know more about how do you define psychological violence, or what are some examples of that?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I created a framework. It's called a Healthy to Innovative framework. That's actually kind of caught on at a few federal agencies. And so the foundation of it is psychological safety. And then it moves up through moral courage, inclusion, diversity, equity, mission readiness, and then innovation. And as people kind of do that work, starting with that foundation of psychological safety, I always coach folks and I say, well, in order for us to have psychological safety in terms of the authenticity, to show up as your full self, we have to address any behaviors systematically and also individual that erode one's psychological safety. So that would be any forms of psychological violence. So harassment, intimidation, workplace bullying, sexual assault, anything that is eroding away from our ability to show up as our full, healthy, thriving self. And as a survivor of various forms of workplace violence, I know what it can do to you firsthand. And so I always advise people, if you want to get at psychological safety, you really have to address psychological violence first, because it's the violence is actually perpetuating the exclusion. It's perpetuating the issues around mental health and the whole range of why a lot of corporate and non-corporate cultures are really dysfunctional, because we're not actually addressing the violence. And it's also disproportionately related. For example, I go back to our civil rights icons and our ancestors, right? Those of us who have experienced the most harm tend to be the ones that are out there on the streets, physical streets, digital streets, wherever those streets are. We're advocating for change, right? And as we're advocating for change, we're actually subjecting ourselves to even more violence. We don't have that psychological safety, but we speak up anyway. Right. And then I see in kind of more of these corporate spaces where people are talking about psychological safety from more of a business, innovation, operational perspective. That's all fine and well. But what about the folks who have more to lose, who have been in the streets advocating for human rights? And by speaking up, you're literally physically threatened, psychologically threatened, right? It's impacting your livelihood, impacting your income, impacting who's in your village, right? But those people speak up anyway. So I think we really have to reconcile those differences. And until, as a society, as a broader culture, and if we are not willing to address the violence that occurs when one speaks up, then we cannot say we're a proponent of psychological safety. We're not even addressing the violence. We're not even
I got so fired up. I'm so glad that you said that. I got so fired up last week. I was pissed off in a women's executive leadership moment. And this woman, did you hear? You know where I'm going. So I heard this woman and she was like, they went on a business trip and they only invited men, right? And she was like, and I talked to the president of the company, I talked to my boss, and I just want to make sure that I was doing the right thing. And I felt really nervous as I was talking to them. And I just felt like I was going to throw up. And I was like, and someone goes, oh, because you were so nervous. I was like, no. I was like, you know what, why she should be throwing up? Because she's been tokenized, representing, showing that they have women in leadership, which they don't have the respect. Other people are coming to the company because they want to work here where they have a fair and balanced executive team, but it's not true. I hope you felt like you were going to throw up because you're a liar.
Yeah. Tokenism conceals that psychological violence exclusion. Absolutely. Because
you can't allow it to happen. And that's why you are such an icon. And so many people have to look to you, like literally. I look at like the whistleblower website and I can like see your picture and I get like, I'm like, holy crap. Like, I'm like, okay, what would I do in that moment? It looks so scary, but you're sitting here, you're sharing the message. You lived through it. You were able to tell the story and uplift others. And I don't know, I think it's amazing. And I think it's so important because like you said, this is psychological violence, and we do have the opportunity to step up. And And I always question people. I can understand being afraid, but it's always like, what would happen if I didn't? Scares me more.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. That's why I say speaking up was literally the least I could do. That's the least. And I sincerely mean that. It's literally the least I can do. I'm also a systems engineer, so I'm always studying, these are systemic issues, that are happening. And so, for me, I'm really driven to, that service of people. And if there are systems that are causing harm to people, then I'm interested in unpacking, like, where is this harm coming from? Is this an education issue? Is this a behavioral issue? Where is this coming from? Right. And so I'm still on that journey. But that's what continues to drive me, is how can we co-create systems that do the opposite, right? We have to do some repair work, some healing work. We need to do some systemic action work, right? And that's why I still continue to converse with folks on the Hill, and that work has been great. And then we also have to get to joy, right? Because we also deserve to actually enjoy our lives. Otherwise, our lives are rooted in trauma. They're rooted in suppression and oppression, right? So no, it's violence. It's everywhere, right? It's going to the grocery store, right?
Yeah.
Going to the grocery store. I would like to be my authentic self in all spaces, but that's not reality, right? That's not reality. So that's also what I'm advocating for, is how do we reimagine and redesign these systems such that every space that you or me or the next person is in, it's not a roll of the dice, right? Is today the day I'm going to be shot? Is today the day I'm going to whatever, right? And I just don't think that folks are really appreciating that yet, unless they've actually experienced it. And so again, I'm really grateful for being able to have this conversation, because it's I don't think that people really frame the psychological violence in that way, in that sense. They just say, oh, you were retaliated against. Oh, well. It's like, no, that's like, the body and mind is not meant to endure that type of psychological trauma for that extended period of time, right? We're not really designed to just keep enduring. Some people call it microaggression, the whole spectrum, right? We're not designed to just keep getting those cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts. So that's, again, kind of my outlook on it, is what we walk by is what we tolerate,
Yep.
One of the things that I'm glad you're hitting on this is the idea around the ongoing, and like going to the grocery store, any of these very small random things. And, I have said, probably even on this podcast, like, I can take off my DEI consultant, my work that I do during the day when I want to. And I'm able to move about society. But, obviously as a woman, there are other things that I can't do, and I think, and which is not even comparable, but, the only way that I can think about it. And I think it's interesting because it is that, like, constant heightened awareness, heightened trauma that people don't realize is happening every single day, every interaction of what do they really mean by what they're saying, or what are they trying to get at? And it's not I'm being sensitive. It's truly what else do I need to protect myself from and make sure I'm safe and make sure I'm okay. And I think that's one of the things that people don't realize or don't think about, because it doesn't impact them or it doesn't affect them. And that's one of the things that always, when I'm moving about my life, I think about, folks that I'm around and with, and, the option that, hey, at any moment, someone could slap handcuffs on me or worse. And for what? So I want to, though, go to a different place, because you've mentioned this a few times now, and it's the joy. So, we talk about this stuff. We know it's heavy. We know it is exhausting. And I want to talk more about the joy and, like, how you find that joy when it does become heavy, when it does become too much. So can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm already laughing thinking about it. So as I've done my activism work while on active duty. Sometimes people think that's impossible, but I've found a way to do it. I do chuckle. I do laugh. You know, 'cause sometimes it's so ridiculous and absurd. It's like a circus. So at some point, you kind of do have to laugh at the absurdity. But beyond that, you know, I have hobbies, I have interests, and you know, I always say that if the trauma that I've endured is so much that it is preventing me from doing activities that I enjoy, then it's kind of like they win. So, so for me personally, I love art, I love music, I love traveling, I love cars. And actually, I very intentionally, I took 45 days off of work. So I'm on loan. So I'm in the Coast Guard, but I'm on loan to a different federal agency where I do cybersecurity. And so I took 45 days off of work. Everyone thought I lost my mind. I've been planning it for like 18 and a half years, and sold my house and got rid of about 90% of all of my personal belongings I've ever accumulated in my lifetime. And spent 3 weeks in Honolulu, Hawaii, and it was amazing. And I got to drive a lot of fun cars, go to museums, just be with nature, be with my thoughts, journal, reflect, sing karaoke, laugh, smile. So for me, it's a process of getting back to myself, right? Like who am I at my core if I remove the trauma, right? So I literally had a very intimate conversation with like my 5-year-old self, you know, and I asked myself, like, you know, like, what were my dreams? You know, am I still following those dreams, or did the trauma really derail my life? Right. And so for me, it's really navigating back to self. It's navigating back to joy, right? Just the natural innocence that we all have as we kind of connect and navigate, you know, on this planet. So for me, it's just, that's a daily journey, you know. And so as I am entrenched and doing the work, right, I'm also very consciously aware of how much I'm smiling, how much I'm laughing, and knowing when I need to take a step back or take a big step back and go to Hawaii.
Right.
But I want to be around for a while, right? I want to be around for a while. So I'm always searching for just who I am at my core. And you know, like I say, I like to laugh. So if doing the work, if designed effectively, in my humble opinion, it should actually put a smile on our face. It really should. It should actually energize us, and it should actually bring us joy, even as we know there's more work to be done.
Yeah.
By the way, did someone say karaoke?
Okay.
I love karaoke.
I love karaoke, and I'm not good at it, and I have no shame. It's my song. It's not in my key. I sing it every time.
She's very good at karaoke, and I have the video to prove it. And
Y'all have to quit recording. Seriously.
her song is Redneck Woman, which everyone in the crowd kind of gives her like the, wait, what? And it's the best thing ever. And she sings it perfectly. So she knows, yeah, she's good. So she can join you at karaoke. I will be the one videotaping. It'll be fun.
Yes. And getting the crowd I'm a great wing person.
Crowd hyper.
Yes. There was a piece. I love that you do that. But then, I mean, we're not even going to have super time. Like, we literally, Kim could be like a 7-episode, right?
Yeah.
Women in tech, cybersecurity, keeping yourself protected, queer in the military. There's so many things that just keep trying to get those pieces. But I do know it is one of those things where you have to think, when you think more about your ancestors, about what you're doing. I thought it was funny you're from Trinidad, Tobago. My grandmother is from the Virgin Islands, and my father was born in the Virgin Islands. And it's very funny because people would say, oh, your grandma sounds like she's from Jamaica. And I was like, don't ever say that. It's a West Indian accent, and you're just going to have to trust me on that. Like, just don't. But then understanding that coming to the United States when you are othered anyway, right? And then having parents coming culturally, what does that mean? And growing up in that environment, we get to see that bravery firsthand. And it's kind of like when we came on with you, we're like, gosh, I guess we're not tired and we're not done. And there's a lot of work to do and we'll be fine. And you look at those other things and say, we have to. It's amazing that you looked at that scenario and you're like, okay, yeah, we're going to have to do work in order to elicit those changes and just be your authentic self, which I should ask, do you feel like you're your authentic self? Like, are you able to bring the you that you want to in your spaces? Because, you know, some of that stuff I do not want to bring to work, right?
Yes. Yes, I actually, from 2016, I've always been myself, but after 2016, I really made more of an intentional effort to really embark on this personal journey to be my authentic self, regardless of the consequence. Authenticity in terms of truth telling, how I wore my hair, I mean, just everything, right? And it was really, again, out of a place of privilege that I have air in my lungs. Right. And so I laugh sometimes in mid-sentence, we say, what's so funny? I just feel very fortunate that I frankly don't care what the consequences are. And I'm going to choose to be myself. And if people aren't ready for that, well, that's their loss. So, just to give just a very quick kind of example of some of the nuanced differences I brought up, hair. So in the military, very similar to corporate America, we had these very archaic rules around natural hair. So Glamour actually had contacted me because I had done some work back in 2014. And the Coast Guard, we'll give the Coast Guard credit, was the first military branch to reverse our ridiculously racist hair policies impacting Black women. So folks working on the Crown Act, so I was able to kind of, you know, share the work I was doing with them. It was very synergistic. And so Glamour kind of did a cover story about that. But that's part of doing the work, right? Like, I want for people to be able to wear your hair as you feel fit, right? However you want to do it. There shouldn't be racist rules and policies that have an impact on if you're going to be promoted or what your evaluation is going to be because of how your hair is styled. So, so for me, it's really yes. The answer is yes, and I laugh because it's not easy, but I do it anyway because I say, well, I don't have any more energy to be anybody else. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I'm enough, you know, and I'm probably a lot. So I just enjoy this journey that I've been on, where I just don't really care if people don't accept me. I really don't. I just don't. I laugh about it, you know. So I am very proud of myself for really showing up authentically in as many spaces as I can, right? There's few exceptions if I feel my life's in danger. From driving my 72 Oldsmobile Cutlass that I restored, and I go to a gas station at night and some guy says, hey, did your boyfriend, let you drive, his car? I am not authentic in those moments. Yes, he did.
Betcha.
And he's at the gym right now.
Right? So there are exceptions to my authenticity rule, but
yes, absolutely.
We all have those. We all have those.
I love what you're saying of it's the I don't care, but it's also because you are being your authentic self, other folks can too. And I think that's the bigger piece to it, is that because of the work you've done and continue to do, and just the conversations and the highlighting of just so many of these issues, as Jackye say, there's so many slices to, your identity that we could dig in on, and yet pulling it all together and creating who you are. Like, you are touching so many different groups and so many different lives. So again, thank you. The way that we usually end our episodes, and we will be having a part 2 through 7, I think. She's like, oh, Nellie, what did I sign up for?
Sorry, but you're welcome. And I'm
You're
sorry.
ours now. You're in the family now. So we usually end each episode with just one thing that we want to make sure that the listener heard. And so would love for you to share, what those, we say one, if it's more than one, it's okay.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I'd like your listeners to know that justice is very difficult. And in my particular case, it's been 8 years and counting. I've never seen any justice. I exposed the highest levels of the Coast Guard and their abuse of power, all the harm that they cause. I prove laws were violated, policies were violated. I prove that over and over and over. But despite that, there's never been any justice in my case. And so I want your listeners to understand that we also have a choice, right? Despite the foolishness and harm and absurdity of all of these types of discriminatory systems, we still have a choice, and we can still choose to fight for who we are at our core. We can choose to fight for spaces where we can thrive. And if that means leaving your organization, then leave your organization, right? So I want your listeners to just take away that we still have choices, right? I am not responsible for the foolishness and the bigotry in the U.S. Coast Guard. I'm not responsible for any of that. And I made my own choices. And I chose to speak up. I chose to laugh. And I chose to keep figuring out, who am I, right? Who am I, both before the trauma, through the trauma, and post-trauma. So that's really what I want your listeners to really kind of to take in is we have choices, and they're beautiful choices, even if it doesn't feel like that is the case in the moment.
Awesome. Thank you. Jackye?
There's a lot. I just want people to know Dr. Kim's story. Like, I want people to look into all of the things, I think, for me. Like, sometimes it's like, what's the one thing? I want them to get to know you, Kim, and understand some of those things, because I feel like people can see themselves in your story, whether it be on Glamour or whether it be YouTube videos or, you talking or people talking about you, or people, there's so many spaces. And also reminding people that you just have to do it. You just have to do it. Like at the end of the day, that it seems to keep coming around to, it was, there was injustice there and we had to make it right. And I think sometimes people just sit and wait for things to get better, and it's not. And you're in there and you do have, a choice, and get on the right side of that choice. Absolutely. Was that like 14 things? I think it was like 3.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. All good.
Okay.
All good.
Okay.
For me, I think it's something that you talked about kind of through your journey of, there were times that it was dark, that it was not, you were not in a great place, but you found that power within yourself. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. We talk about power a lot. We know there's a lot of power dynamics at work, in the world, etc. And finding that power within yourself, I think, is such a huge lesson for folks. And we know there's always going to be the detractors. And I'm like, this one, I'm like, gosh, I want like all of my nieces and nephews to listen to this one, because it's also that, like, it's not about the amount of likes you get on your TikTok. It's find that power within yourself to take action, to do something, to create change that will be positive. And I am going to give a second one, although this is probably like the 6th. And it's also like, take the action knowing that it might not bring you justice, but for the next person behind you and the next person, like each one of these steps. But it's also hurry freaking up and let's get this done. Because I think that's the other piece is I think all of us, we want to lose our job at some point in this work, and we want to not have to think about it. All right, Dr. Kim, we will have you back soon because we have to continue this discussion, but thank you all for listening. This is the Inclusive AF podcast. I'm Katee Van Horn.
And I'm Jackye Clayton. Bye.